Hey everyone, how's it going? Forrest here, again with another installment of my complete analysis of all of J.S. Bach's chorale harmonizations. Today we're looking at Nimm von uns Herr, du treuer Gott, which translates to, take from us, you faithful God. This is a really interesting chorale actually. There's one particular cadence here at the end that I forgot to add for Modas too, but still super fascinating cadence, and the harmony throughout is pretty dense, and we see some interesting modulation schemes. Let's just start out with the analysis. So one flat in the key signature, we start on D minor, we end on D major. We spend the majority of our chorale, or we spend the majority of our time in this chorale in the key of D minor. After our one chord we have C sharp, A, E, and A. It's a 5-6 chord, A major over C sharp, and then we go right back to D minor, D, A, D, and F natural, 1, 5, 6, 1. We then have E, G, D, and G, but this D is a 7-6 suspension over the bass. It's actually C sharp diminished over E, which is 7-6. That goes right back to D minor, D, F, D, and A in root position. A couple of passing tones in the lower voices before we get F, A, D, and F, another D minor triad, this time just in first inversion, so no need to reanalyze, just change the figured bass. Passing tone in the bass as well, before we get A major in root position, A, C sharp, and E. It's a 5 chord. Bass leaps down an octave. Tenor gets a passing 7th before we get a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor, where we cadence on D minor, D, F, A, and D. Alright, next up we have an interesting progression. I think we stay in the key of D minor, but we have a half cadence at the end of it. And we start off with this dichotomy, there's no dichotomy. The dichotomy comes at the end of the next phrase, but here we have A minor, C natural, A, E, and A, which is an A minor triad. First inversion, that's a 5-6 chord, but minor 5, and I think this minor 5 is being used in a context where the 5 is not going to 1. We have the descending minor scale, D, C natural, B flat, as opposed to the ascending melodic minor scale, B natural, C sharp, D, which is a configuration we often see it in, even though you can do them in either direction, but a popular configuration is natural on the way down, raised on the way up. We have B flat, D, and A, which is B flat major in root position, or more specifically B flat major 7, so that'd be a 6-7 chord with a passing tone in the tenor before we get B flat, D, and G, which would be G7, apologies, that would be a G minor chord in first inversion. So this could be 4-6, or it might be, if you consider this E, our chord tone, E, B flat, D, and G, which would be E minor 7 flat 5 over B flat, which would be a 2-4-3 chord, which 6-7 wants to go to, or more specifically 6 wants to go to 2, albeit they both share a bass, and it's really where the bass wants to go rather than the chord on top of it wants to go, but regardless, 6 is still going to 2 in the bass. I think either of these analyses are accurate. We then have A, C, F, and C, so a bit of a deceptive progression here. We would expect 4 to go to 5, but here we have it going to F major, first inversion. That'd be a 3-6 chord with some passing tones in the lower voices before we get F, E, C sharp, and A. And I don't think this is an augmented 7 chord, but if we take a look at this E right here, we have E, E, C sharp, and A, which is A major over E, which is 5-6-4. Kind of uncommon to see a 5-6-4 chord, but it's part of a passing figure. We have this long descending passage where we go from B flat all the way down to A without changing direction in the bass, so it's definitely part of a passing figure, which is a common place to see, or it's one of the usual places we see second inversion triads. We then have D, A, D, and F, which is a root position D minor triad with a passing 7th in the bass. We have B flat, D, and G, which is G minor over B flat, another 4-6 chord, before we cadence on A major, A, E, C sharp, and A, which is a 5 chord, making this a Phrygian half cadence, where we have the half step motion from the flat 6 going down to 5 on the bass. Alright, continuing ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor. And we have this interesting dichotomy of major and minor again. We have A major at the cadence and then A minor immediately afterwards. So this is the second phrase now that has started with an A minor chord. Here I firmly believe that it is a minor 5 chord, but here it does not sound like a minor 5 chord. This entire phrase right here sounds like, or I say this entire phrase, no, this fragment of the phrase definitely sounds like we're in the key of F major. And it really sounds like a direct modulation to me. This A minor and this A major, there is a very stark contrast between the two of them, so I don't think there's a very smooth and meaningful common chord analysis between the two of them. I really think this A minor sticks out. So I think this A minor is 3 in the key of F major with some passing tones in the lower voices. And if we take a look at these passing tones, we actually get something significant. We get G, B flat, E, and C, which is C7 over G, which is 5, 4, 3. And we see 3 to 5 with some regularity. And that goes right to F major, F, A, F, and C, which is our tonic triad. We have another passing 7th in the bass, and then we get D minor, D, F, A, and D, which is our 6th chord. And it also happens to be our tonic in the key of D minor, and I think we modulate immediately afterwards as we get the ascending melodic minor scale in the bass. So this seems a little bit more than just a tonicization to me, because we get the predominant, the dominant, and the tonic functioning chords, and it really sounds like we have the 3 of the major scale going to the 5 of the major scale, before we get like an interesting pentatonic pattern here. We get A, C, D, F. He avoids the leading tone entirely in the the melody avoids the leading tone, and it's the inner voices that provide the context. But even though it's a slight modulation, I'd say that we've changed key here, especially because the phrase has come to an end, and this is the first thing we're hearing after the modulation. And it's interesting that this half cadence, which we would expect to immediately go to D minor, is delayed via a modulation to F. Regardless, we go to B, D, G, and F, which is G7, and we might be tempted to call that 5 of 7, but I think actually this is just a harmonization of the melodic minor scale. This is just 4, 6, 5 uppercase. That then goes to C sharp, E, A, and E, which is A major over C sharp. It's a 5, 6 chord. And then we have D minor, D, A, F, and D, which is our tonic triad. We then have A major on the next beat, A, E, and C sharp, which is our 5 chord. And then interestingly, we get a Picardy third cadence in the middle of the chorale, D, A, F sharp, and D, which definitely feels like a major tonic. Now we're moving ahead to the next phrase, which is very interesting as well. Not the most interesting phrase, but I don't think there's a really elegant way to go about analyzing this. Well, maybe there is, I don't know. But this D right here is the dominant of the next chord. So I think when we look ahead, we have a perfect authentic cadence in the key of A minor. However, this G right here, I think we get a direct modulation to the key of A minor here. I think there are 2 ways we can go about analyzing this. I'm going to call this a direct modulation, even though we have a dominant of G major here. I'm going to call this G major chord 7 in the key of A minor. However, we can go ahead and say that this is 5 of 4 in the key of D minor. Or you can go as far to say as this is 5 of 7 in the key of A minor, but I think it's less likely to see a tonicization of the 7 chord, even though the chord in this case is minor, because the chord quality fluctuates between major and diminished depending on whether there's a leading tone present or not. It's just not something that we commonly see, so it's interesting how we see this. So you might want to say that that's kind of what's happening here, and then instead we get a modulation to A minor, but let's see how this goes. The parenthetical analysis is a little bit weaker than the direct modulation, I would say. But here we have C, C, G, and E, 7 goes to 3 in root position, C major, passing 7th in the bass, passing tone in the alto. Also forgot to mention that some people call this 5 of 3 rather than 7 because 7 often goes to 3, but we typically expect the diminished 7 chord to go to 3, but there's no real reason why one can't go versus the other. It's just a quality thing. Regardless, we have A, F, B, and D. However, this A I think is our non-chord tone. Even though we could call this like a 2-4-2 chord, I think it's more likely this G sharp is our chord tone, and this is actually a 7-7 chord, fully diminished G sharp 7 chord, before we go to our tonic A minor, A, E, A, and C natural. So we have 3 going to 7, which is kind of unusual, but we see it with some frequency, just because Bach goes in different ways around the cycle of falling fifths. Sometimes he goes up a fifth, sometimes he goes down a fifth. But then we have a passing 7th in the bass before we go to F, D, G sharp, and B natural, again, which is another interesting chord. We have another G sharp diminished chord. Oh no, sorry, apologies. This F natural is not the chord tone. I think it's this E right here that's our chord tone, and instead this is a 5-7 chord, E7 in root position. I guess technically speaking, this could be another diminished 7th chord in second inversion, if you're literally looking on the harmonic rhythm. But I think if the difference between them is the F and the E, it's more likely that the E is the chord tone here. But then we go to, depending on how we look at it, I hear it as an F major chord, F, C, A, and A. Another 5-7 going to 6, like we saw before, even though this is major and this is major and this one's minor and this one's major. If you look at this F right here as the non-chord tone, you could say that A minor in second inversion is what this chord is, because the E would be changing the bass. We then have D, F, G sharp, and B. I think this D and this F are both accented non-chord tones, and really what this is E major in root position, 6 going to 5, going to what's going to be our A major chord, another Picardy third cadence, which is unusual. 2 in succession is unprecedented in my analysis so far. I can't recall another chorale that has had that profile to it, where it's had 2 Picardy third cadences in the middle of it. Maybe one other one, but I'd have to go back through my notes. I guess technically speaking, you could say that this is also a G sharp diminished triad in second inversion, or G sharp fully diminished 7th chord in second inversion, 7-4-3, but I think 5 is more likely, and it's just contrapuntal here. But then we have the most interesting phrase in the entirety of the chorale. We have an ending with a deceptive cadence, and we'll talk about this chord when we get there. So here we have G sharp, B, E, and D, which is E7 over G sharp. That's just another 5-6 chord, and that goes to A minor, A, C, E, and C. And this is where I think we modulate to the key of F major, where A minor is now our 3 chord, similar to how we saw right here. We go to F major via the 3 chord. We have a passing tone in the alto, and we leap up an octave in the bass before we go to G, D, G, and B natural. So we would expect G minor in the key of F major, but here we get G major, so that would be a secondary dominant. That would be 5 of 5, because G is the dominant of C, and C is our dominant, our 5th. And we have a passing 7th in the bass as well, before we go to C, 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 G, E, C, G, and C with the passing 7th in the melody. That would be a C major triad in first inversion, 5-6 chord. And that goes to F major like we would expect, F, C, F, and A. An F major triad in root position with a passing 7th in the bass. Lots of passing 7ths in the bass in this chorale. Before we go to D minor, D, D, F, and A, which is a 6 chord. 1-6 is pretty common, especially with that passing tone, with a passing 7th in the bass as well. And then we go to B flat, D, F, and G, which is G minor 7 over B flat, which is a 2-6-5 chord. We know that Bach loves his 2-6-5 chords. And then we have a couple of passing tones, or a couple of delayed non-chord tones. This actually isn't a passing tone. This is a neighbor tone. So we only have one passing tone. But we have C, C, E, and G, which is a C major triad in root position. And then we get a very interesting chord. We get D flat, A flat, F, and F. That's a D flat major triad, or a flat 6 in the key of F major. It's really interesting. We're getting this modal mode mixture going on, where he's borrowing from the parallel minor in the context of a deceptive cadence. It's a really wild cadence. It's like it doubles down on the deceptive nature, because we would expect cadence on D minor, but we get D flat major, and using that F there to tonicize not D minor but D flat major is a particularly interesting loop that we're thrown for. So it's a particularly interesting part of the chorale. But regardless, we'll continue on into our last phrase, which ends in a perfect authentic cadence in the key of D minor. We go to F sharp diminished. It's fully diminished over over C. That would be the leading tone chord, so 7, 4, 3 of G minor, which is presently our 2. We then go to G minor, G, D, G, and B flat, which is our 2 in the key of F major, but in the key of D minor, it is our 4. And our passing 7th is in the alto this time rather than in the bass. And then 4 goes to 5, A, C sharp, E, and A. This D is like a 4-3 suspension over the bass, but no need to mark it, we could just talk about it. And then we go to B flat, D, D, and A, which is interesting. This D sort of as like an inner pedal tone. And this inner pedal tone kind of forces us to infer the chords that are happening on the passing beats rather than strictly analyzing them on the page. So this B flat, B flat, B flat, B flat, D, and A would be another 6-7 chord, just like we had here. B flat, D, and A. So we have 6-7 neighbor tones in the alto and the bass. I'd be like taking this and turning it into a 5 chord, but this suspended D keeps us from really analyzing it strictly on the page. It's just something that we talk about and infer in conversation. But then we go to B, D, D, and G. This is a B natural, so it's G major over B. And remember, this isn't 5 of C major. This is a harmonization of the melodic minor scale, right? 5, 6, 7, 1, and he's just ascending the melodic minor scale. So this would be a 4-6 chord. We have non-chord tones here. So usually when we get a 4-6 chord and we go to 1, which is a typical place for 4-6 to go, D, D, A, and F, which is our tonic triad in root position, we typically connect it via the C sharp here. That's the minimum we get. We also almost have the makings of, we actually have the makings of a 7 chord, C sharp, E, and G, but this D right here keeps us from fully realizing the chord, because the chord is happening around it. Just with the D there, it is not going to go to the trouble of analyzing it. We're just sort of talking about it, knowing that it's there, but the D complicates the analysis. We then have F, A, D, and F, so that's like turning the chord into first inversion. We then have G, B flat, D, and E, which is E minor 7 flat 5 over G. That's a 2-6-5 chord. We then have A, C sharp, and E. That's a 5 chord. That's what we would expect to happen after 2-6-5, or just 2-6 in general. And then we have D major, D, F sharp, A, and D. Bach often ends his minor chorales with a major chord, I imagine because he wants to end on an uplifting note, but that Picardy third is a hallmark of the final cadence of a minor chorale. Not all of them, but the vast majority of them so far. And that is today's analysis. Definitely an unusual chorale with this flat 6 deceptive cadence, couple of direct modulations, a couple of interesting harmonic interpretations or split interpretations where a chord could be analyzed in one of a couple of ways, but regardless, it's pretty straightforward chorale, all things considered. All the harmony when we are in the chorale and we're in like the middle of the phrase pretty much occurs the way that you would expect it to. It resolves where we expect it to. We do get a couple of interesting quirky chords, but it is what it is. And that being said, thank you so much for supporting the channel and watching the video. If you're watching this video as I'm uploading it, or as I'm uploading my series on analyzing the Bach chorales, I'm in the process of analyzing all of them. So if you want a daily dose of analysis or a daily dose of Bach, I upload once a day, and if you subscribe to the channel and hit the notification icon, you'll be notified when I upload. And there are hundreds of videos scheduled for the future, so if you're interested in this sort of thing, or if you want to go on the journey with me, feel free to subscribe. But that being said, I think I've said enough about this chorale. I'm going to cap the video off. Thank you again so much for watching the video. Thank you so much for supporting the channel. I look forward to tomorrow's analysis, and I hope you take care.